qualified if I'm allowed. Taxation is theft.
You're home at night and someone knocks on the door and you answer the door and there's a guy with a gun and the guy says, "Give me your money, I want to give it away in your name." Was this guy crazy? You call the police, you find out he's an IRS agent. So that's what taxation is. It is the government extracting money from you against your will to give it away in your name. I'll say this plainly, I've said it before. Taxation is theft. It presumes that the government has a higher claim on our property than we do.
Is taxation theft in your mind?
Yes, it is. It has to steal from a productive individual and give it to somebody else.
How about this one? Taxation is theft.
Sherry Peel Jackson. She is an ex-IRS agent, CPA, fraud examiner. She was working for the IRS. She was on the fast track to success there. She was doing very well, had received numerous awards for all of the work she did, and she realized that there is no law and that the biggest fraud was the IRS.
I tried to be the best at whatever I did. So when I got to the IRS, I hit the ground running. My first year in 1988, I got a fraud award. It's a big Shaped in Georgia award for fraud. But I got numerous awards, and my biggest one is from the IRS commissioner himself. Back in 1995, it was Fred T. Goldberg. One of the things that I wanted to tip you off on as far as what the IRS does before I get into the story, they have, well they had, I don't know what they're doing now, but they had what's called the Market Segment Specialization Program, or MSSP. They would take different market segments, like ministers, and try to figure out how much money you were underreporting. Let's take beauticians, for example. I'm going to audit her beauty shop. She owns the shop and she has some people working there. Based on the assumption that the IRS has that people don't report all of their money, but they like to put all their expenses on there. So granted, all her expenses are on the tax return, and I figure out how many bottles of this and that she bought, I can calculate a dollar figure. So I'll tell Sophia, after it's all over and we're buddy-buddy, I just shock her and I say, well, guess what? It looks like, based on my calculations, that you really brought in $80,000, but you have $50 on the tax return. So here, you owe the IRS back $30,000. What would she do? She would sign off on it. I only had 2 cases in 7.5 years where somebody actually bucked at me. People are so afraid. The government and the media have gotten you guys so afraid of the IRS that you don't even buck them. Now, mind you, she might have left some money off. Maybe there was several times where she just didn't report the cash. And maybe that's why. Maybe she has no idea how much she, quote-unquote, underreported. Maybe that was it. But they always acquiesce. The Gap one, anybody own a laundromat, they have one that will calculate, based on your water bill, how many loads were washed at your laundromat. And the point to all of this is what they do to people, and people just acquiesce to it. When I quit the IRS in 1995, and after maybe a year of being Jim Cleaver and realizing that that was just not me, I hung my shingle, which in accounting terms or business terms is you start your own business. Now, you know that picture of Uncle Sam, the one that says Uncle Sam wants you? I used that same picture, and I had it really big, and it says, Uncle Sam wants your money. But I'm a former IRS agent. I'm going to show you how to get it back. You know, the people came running. And then these people start coming to me saying, I keep hearing that we're not supposed to pay tax. Or I keep hearing that the tax law is a fraud. And like I said, I was raised differently. I never would look at that person and say, you're a cuckoo. I wouldn't even think it. It was like, okay, you know, in this back burner back here, I would think to myself, okay, there's some people out there that actually think that the income tax doesn't apply to us, or it's a fraud, or it's being misapplied. But I didn't do anything about it because, remember, I'm rolling along with my little businesses and whatnot. So one night maybe in early June, one of my pastor clients called. It was night. It was about 9 o'clock at night. And she said, you know what? I think it was maybe a Wednesday night, after her Wednesday night service. She said, I've got this parishioner that just keeps bugging me about this income tax. She's talking about that we're not liable for the income tax, and she wants to talk to you. Can I give this lady your telephone number? And I said, okay. So maybe about 10 minutes later, this lady called me. She said, I have a question for you. Are we supposed to pay income tax or not? And I said, okay. Do you want the cuff answer or do you want the real answer? She said, I want the real answer. I said, well, I really don't know. You know, even though I'm a former IRS agent, I haven't done the research, but I hear that there's a credible body of evidence out there that says that we don't owe income tax. I was okay. I mean, I took the information. I was sitting there listening like, okay. And, you know, I said, okay, this lady had a lot of information. I don't know where she got it from. So a few weeks later, she called me again, and she said, Miss Jackson, remember that information I told you on the phone? It's in the USA Today. Pull it up on the internet. Okay, so I got the USA Today. It was July 7th, 2000. And it says, Dear we the people, most citizens are not required to file an income tax return. The 16th Amendment to the Constitution is a fraud, and if you file, you waive your Fifth Amendment rights. I said, okay, that's another stuff she was saying. Now, this is a lot of reading. But I kept reading because I was very interested, you know, being a CPA and into fraud and all that. I wanted to see what was going on. So here in the third column, it says no one has been able to collect the $50,000 reward offered by Bill Conklin to anyone that can identify the section of the Internal Revenue Code that makes a typical worker liable for the income tax. I'm serious about winning this $50,000. Okay, so it's at my desk. Basically, I just shoved everything off my desk and got the codes out, the regulations out, the tax guide I got on the internet to look at the Cornell University site, all these different things, and I started researching. And 2 weeks later, I said to myself, oh my goodness, we have a problem here. It doesn't look like I'm going to win this money. And I was sitting there at my desk thinking, this thing is a fraud. 2 weeks it took me to sit there and realize that. I didn't just look at the positive, I looked at the negative, I looked at the IRS site. All these things are going on. This thing is a fraud. Being a CPA and a former IRS agent, I sat there at the desk, you know, I was by myself, and all these thoughts started going through my head. The first thought was, now I finally open up the codes and regulations. Because see, at the IRS, they trained us with these little guides. We didn't use the codes and regulations. We would get one of these, and you would have to read it, understand it, and pass this little test. And all these little guides that I got, I read them, and I made A's on all my tests. And I thought, and I guess the rest of the agents in training thought, that the information that was in here was the same that was in those thick codes and regulations. But it's not necessarily the same. The things that are in these training manuals are not necessarily the same things in the codes and regulations. I learned that in my studying. And the time that I was doing the research, I also learned about the pocket commission. And I'm going to let this go around the room, but y'all got to give it back. This is the outside that I purchased of the pocket commission that I had. And before I left, I had the sense of mind to make a copy. This is the little badge I used to flip out at people and say, give me your books and records. Give me your bank statements. Give me all your credit cards, you know. And, you know, people, okay, here. You know, even the counties, I go to the county, do it. I go just about anywhere and flip this little thing out and get whatever I want. You know, there's a lot of power nuts out there doing that, guys. Y'all know it. Half of you already know about it. There's an enforcement pocket commission, and there's a non-enforcement pocket commission. And I started looking back at this thing. It has SER, Southeast Region. First of all, I'll read it. It has my picture up here, and it says, Sherry Jackson, whose signature and picture appear above, is duly commissioned as Internal Revenue Agent and has authority to perform all duties conferred upon such officers under all laws and regulations administered by the Internal Revenue Service, including the authority to investigate and require and receive information as to all matters relating to such laws and regulations. And it has SER and some other numbers and an A. And based on this Internal Revenue Manual, A means administrative. So I'm an administrative clerk out there on the front lines. And I'm an administrative clerk with a non-enforcement pocket commission. Okay, so I'm starting to get angry here. Starting to think about all that. I had to take bribes and get little tape recorders taped to my body and the little microphones on me and go in and take bribes from people. But, you know, thinking about stuff like that, you know, what they got me out here, and I'm thinking I really have authority. And this is administrative, non-enforcement pocket commission. That was one of the other things I thought about. And then I thought about, and I found out this is another issue, a levy versus a notice of levy. This is something that I didn't deal with a lot because I was an agent and I just assessed the tax. I wasn't a tax collector. I just assessed it. So this is a notice of levy, and someone said, "Hey, this is a notice of levy. This is what the banks get, or your job, or whatever." They said, "Look at the back of it." So I'm looking at the back of this notice of levy, and it says Section 6331, levy and distraint, and then it says B and C. And I'm thinking, it starts off with B? What happened to A? So I looked up A. And here's A. And it says levy may be made upon the accrued salary or wages of any officer, employee, or elected official of the United States, the District of Columbia, or any agency or instrumentality of the United States or the District of Columbia by serving a notice of levy. I'm thinking, but that's not most people. That's not the person that works at AT&T or Bell South or Coca-Cola. That's not most people. Aren't people noticing that the A isn't on here? Aren't they curious about it? Why are they doing this? So all this is going through my head during this period of time that I'm realizing that there's a rat in the camp. That's what I call it. But this is the straw that broke the camel's back. The Federal Reserve is not federal. How many of you did not know before today that the Federal Reserve isn't federal? If you did not, don't be shy. If you didn't know before today that the Federal Reserve isn't federal, raise your hand. Most people don't know that. 9 out of 10 people that I asked off the street don't understand that the Federal Reserve is a non-auditable private banking cartel. They are collecting $6 million an hour in interest from the American people. $36 million an hour in interest from the American people. My children, my 2 children, were born $86,000 in debt based on the national debt. Now, why am I going to take away from those children to give to somebody that is going to be born in 2030? That's not going to happen. So that was my decision. It was very easy. You know, you think about stuff like fear. Oh, the IRS is going to get you. They're going to take your stuff. That's not important to me. Stuff's not important to me. My children are important to me. I'm one of those mothers that will roll up her sleeves with one leg and try to whoop you if you mess with my children. And I think that a lot of mothers are like that. So this is what my decision was. And I went on and started educating people. One of the things that people asked me once I made this decision and started talking about it, how are we going to run the country without the income tax? I don't know how much Dan got into it, but the Grace Commission report that Ronald Reagan put out in 1984, says that none of the money collected in income tax goes towards running the country. But the bottom line is it's not going towards running the country, so you patriotic people out there, you've been fooled. Beardsley Rummel, he was Federal Reserve Chairman back in 1946, did a speech before the American Bar Association. The title of his speech was Taxes for Revenue Are Obsolete. Within the body of this report, he says that the taxes, the income taxes for redistribution of wealth. What is redistribution of wealth? What is that? That's taking from me that I've worked hard for and giving it from somebody else to somebody else. Shouldn't I have the right to redistribute my wealth if I want to? Another question that they ask me is, how come I haven't heard this on TV or on the radio or in the newspaper? Well, sweetie, the simple answer to that is the same people who own the television stations and the newspapers and the radio stations are the same people who are involved with the Federal Reserve. And here is a little statement that says that it only requires 5% ownership to significantly influence the media. Rockefeller is one of the original shareholders of the Federal Reserve. As early as 1963, the House Banking Subcommittee reported that Rockefeller, through Chase Manhattan Bank, controlled 5.9% of the stock in CBS and the bank and gained interlocking directorates with ABC. I went all the way through high school, all the way through college, all the way through testing for the CPA, and all this Irish training and didn't hear about any of this. You think they want this information out here? For you guys to eat up and chew up and find out what's really going on? I don't think so. Now, another one. Why don't we just tell our elected officials about this? And to make a really long story short, the We the People Foundation, the same people that put out this ad, put together a hearing. And these 40 researchers, we're going to ask the IRS and the DOJ these questions, and we're going to have this big meeting in Washington called the Truth and Taxation Hearings. Okay? So we got together with 537 questions. So we sent them the 537 questions so they could research and have the answers, and what did they do? They reneged on coming. They signed off on it, but they reneged on coming. So you all didn't get to hear the truth. We went on and had the hearings anyway, put it on CD, marched around Washington, giving it to all 535 congressmen and senators. Please look at this information. We got stupid responses back like, thank you for visiting our offices in Washington. The next time you come to Washington, please visit us again. They don't care. Your presidents don't care. Another one that they ask me, or they'll say something like, well, this just sounds like it's some kind of conspiracy theory. Y'all hear that a lot? Okay. Well, tell me this. What's the difference between a conspiracy and a strategy? Don't you understand that this is all by design? All this black, white stuff. You're white, I'm black, you know. You're a Democrat, I'm a Republican. You know, y'all heard of divide and conquer before, right? Why y'all letting them do it to us? While I'm sitting up here arguing with this man about what his great-great-great-granddaddy did to mine, there's this big old fence closing in around us. And while I'm sitting here wasting time and he's sitting here telling me why he doesn't know, we need to put our heads together and figure out how to get out of this fence that these people are building around us. Am I right? Yeah. That's what we got to be. Divide and conquer, we can't let that work anymore. It's been working all these years. Then we need to get together and understand. First of all, you need to understand what is going on with your money. You work hard. It's like we're a hamster on a wheel. This country started out with taxation without representation. Where are we now? How did we get back to where we started? We got lazy and comfortable. Get out your comfort zone. I never tell people to file a tax return. I never tell them not to file. I never tell people to pay taxes, and I never tell them not to pay. What I tell people is to do your own research, do your due diligence, and decide whether or not you're going to be a slave or get off the plantation. That's your choice. So in essence, you're wasting time. As long as you continue to feed the monster's going to grow. They're going to laugh in your face. And any kind of cause that you have, anything that you're trying to do in your life concerning getting things back on track with our country, the way it's supposed to be, you're going to get laughed at because you continue to give them the money to do whatever it is they're doing to us. A lot of people don't care. A lot of people get the money taken out of their checks and they actually think they're getting, I get back $3,000 every year. They don't take anything from me. I say, sweetie, look at your W-2. They took $14,000. They gave you back $3,000 of your own money. Oh. But the point is, if each of us understands where we are, who we are, and tries to do something about it, then we're going to get somewhere. This is a great country, but it's off track. And who's going to get it back on track? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all.
Why mainstream forms of money are evil. First, let's look at some definitions. Evil. Morally reprehensible, wicked, an evil impulse, arising from actual or imputed bad character or conduct, causing discomfort or repulsion, disagreeable, causing harm. Money. Something generally accepted as a medium of exchange, a measure of value, or a means of payment, such as officially coined or stamped metal currency, money of account, paper money. These definitions only take us so far into understanding the nature of the evil in money. We need to dig beneath the surface of both of these ideas to identify the evil that I want you to recognize with me. Evil seems simple enough, but it is to some extent subjective. What is evil to me might not be evil to you. What is less subjective, though, is our emotional responses that relate to survival and what we might call the pleasure-pain principle. While it might be true that some people are emotionally dysfunctional to the point of not feeling much at all, we all generally will feel the pain of being stabbed by a knife, or more poignantly, the pain of being starving, homeless, and likely ill as a result too. We will generally all also feel the pleasure of having our needs met and of feeling secure in life in general. Evil is defined by dictionaries as causing discomfort, repulsion, and harm, and in our current society, we are likely to experience these when lacking money for any significant length of time. A lack of money tends to mean that we are unable to buy food, clothing, or find a place to sleep, and so we suffer and may even die as a result. Some of us, though, might disagree that this is evil, because there is no intention to cause someone to end up this way, and some may even claim that any evil involved is the doing of the person who is actually poor and suffering, that they have somehow brought about this suffering on themselves through poor choices, and thus the evil is perhaps their own. What if it could be shown that there is intention to cause such harm to people through the use of money? Would that then make the money itself evil? I will show you here that there is an intent to cause harm that has been built into our money systems, and that as a result, the causation of extreme suffering to people is intentionally unavoidable. I will also show that mathematically there is no possible other outcome than bankruptcy for a significant percentage of the population, as long as the money systems in use today continue to be used. The complexity of the financial systems has made understanding this information unnecessarily challenging for most of us for a long time. However, thanks to the internet and many researchers, I will be able to summarize the logic of the situation relatively quickly. 1. Wealth gap. The majority of the wealth of the planet, money, resources and property titles, is held by a small minority of the population, with most people having close to zero or even less than zero due to debt. The top 20% wealthiest households own over 93% of the stock. This means that most people who are born, statistically, will have close to zero support other than what they might claim from governments or as a result of their parents working for a business run by one of the wealthier families. 2. Government corruption. The situation is made worse by the reality that vast amounts of tax money is spent not on helping the human population, but on bailing out banks, paying for military wars, and is lost in corrupt projects that aren't properly overseen. For example, here's a story from just a few days ago of how the US government has quietly given unstable banks $400 billion without most people even noticing. The amount given to human services fluctuates, but the general trend that sees much of the government's tax money being siphoned back off to the wealthiest, who control the governments via their proxy politicians, is a virtually perpetual trend. These first 2 points set the scene for why so many are impoverished from the get-go, and why no matter how much tax you seem to pay, the problems never get any better. Those who do not do enough research and tend to assume that the problem is a fundamental lack of intelligence among the least wealthy. These commenters often fail to do the needed due diligence research to know what is really going on in the mathematics and policies in the world around them. When throwing judgment on others, we must always look first at our own involvement in causing what we are pointing at in others. 3. Monetary fraud. Perhaps the most important point here to understand is that the entire foundation of the money creation process is fraudulent. Money is a token that is intended to represent the value of things in our world to make trade easier. In a perfect world, we would only receive the tokens that roughly represent the sum of the value of our past actions to the human community, and therefore our value in the community should be to some extent reflected by the amount of money we receive, spend and hold. This is part of why people often get so obsessed with money, since they falsely associate money with a sense of self-worth. We generally understand that if someone can get money for nothing, then the entire system of valuation breaks down, and everyone else's money becomes devalued, making their life more difficult. Everyone has to work harder for less as long as someone is making money out of thin air. When people are caught counterfeiting money, they're sent to jail, because we know that money out of thin air is a huge problem. However, the most wealthy, via the banking system and the controlled governments, have been doing exactly this for decades in a way that most people don't understand and that has even been made legal. This is partly why the cost of living seems to continually get higher, while the availability of money to the majority of people gets continually more limited. Fractional reserve banking is a key part of the problem here. Many good documentaries have now exposed how the central banks have long been allowed to simply imagine money out of nothing, loan it out at interest, and then expect the money plus the interest to be paid back. Professor Richard Werner published a scientific study and empirical evidence gathered through monitoring a bank's systems in real time. He confirmed that this money out of nothing approach to banking is indeed how things are being operated. Banks can legally loan out a factor of around 30 times the amount of money they actually hold. Imagine if you could loan people 30 times the actual amount of money you have in your savings, plus charge them interest. You'd be very rich in no time, as long as no one found out what you were up to. This is exactly what banks have been doing via fractional reserve banking. Not only does this mean that those involved become stinking rich at the expense of everyone else, which could be said to be a form of mathematically managed slavery, but it gets worse. Since a huge amount of the alleged money in circulation is actually credit and loans based, upon which interest is being charged, there actually isn't enough real money in circulation to pay back the interest. This can mean only one thing. Many people who take out loans and credit will be unable to repay them. It doesn't matter how hard people work or really what they do, there will be a high percentage of people who go bankrupt. Understanding this mathematical reality is key to understanding how to improve society for almost everyone, and is also part of why the claim that poor people are just lazy is itself based only in ignorance. Conclusion. If you lack money in our society, you will suffer and possibly die as a result. The financial systems are deliberately configured to ensure that a certain percentage of people will lack money, and that another group of people will end up with most of the money, regardless of whether any of these people actually provide valuable services to the community. This is not something that could have been created out of pure ignorance or by accident, especially considering the number of economic experts tasked with monitoring the situation and setting policy. Somewhere along the way, money stopped being a convenient token for exchange and became a weapon of enslavement and tyranny. The harm caused by this can only be defined as evil, using the dictionary definitions already provided. It is not possible to use the fiat currencies such as US dollars, British pounds, and euros without participating in a system that manifests evil on a grand scale. Even if you stop using these currencies and shift to alternatives such as cryptocurrencies, you will still be participating in the same evil, since the new tokens can be bought using the old tokens and therefore are still subject to the same problems. The evil is both systemic and very well ingrained into society's structure. Logically, the only solution is to somehow try to reset the economic system and ownership of all resources, or to somehow evolve beyond the use of money altogether. In my experience, evolution means adapting to live from the heart in a way that brings real and felt balance. It is no surprise that it is the financially poorest among us who are often known and felt to have the biggest hearts. They know what it is to suffer, and they seek to prevent it wherever they can. Those with the most wealth also stand to gain greatly through a process of genuine heart-centered balancing in society, since they will no longer need to live in fear in their gated communities, wondering when the rest of the world will come to find them seeking justice. Compassion has the answers here, and those who have been born into a world that has been turned against them, while simultaneously trying to bury them in guilt for being too lazy, no matter how hard they try, and too stupid, no matter how inventive they try to be, are the ones with the most to gain, the least to lose, and often with the most compassion.
For the last few years, I've had this sense that everything I learned as a kid about how America's government works is completely wrong. But I had no idea how bad things actually were until I saw this one graph. Researchers at Princeton University looked at more than 20 years worth of data to answer a pretty simple question. Does the government represent the people? Now, this is what they found. This axis here represents public support for any given idea. On the left, at 0%, are ideas that not a single American wants. On the right, at 100%, are ideas that everyone supports. This axis represents the likelihood of Congress passing a law that reflects any of these ideas, from a 0 to a 100% chance. On this graph, an ideal republic would look like this. If 50% of the public supports an idea, there's a 50% chance of it becoming law. If 80% of us support something, there's an 80% chance. You get the idea. Now, most Americans would probably agree that, with a few exceptions, we should be as close to this ideal as possible. Unfortunately, the way America actually works doesn't even come close. Take an idea that nobody supports, literally nobody, and it has about a 30% chance of becoming federal law. Now, take an incredibly popular idea, the most popular idea this country has ever seen, and there's also about a 30% chance of it becoming law. This means that the number of American voters for or against any idea has no impact on the likelihood that Congress will make it law. Put another way, and I'm just going to quote the Princeton study directly here, the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. So if you've ever felt like your opinion doesn't matter and that the government doesn't really care what you think, well, you're right. But there's a catch. This flat line only accounts for the bottom 90% of income earners in America. Economic elites, business interests, people who can afford lobbyists, they get their own line. Look at how much closer their line is to the ideal. When they want something, the government is much more likely to do it. And when they don't, they have the power to completely block it from happening, no matter how much the rest of the country supports it. They get what they want, and guess who ends up paying for it? We pay for it with the most expensive healthcare in the world. We pay for it with a tax code that's a complete mess. We pay for it with internet that's slower and more expensive, with wasteful spending, a floundering education system, a catastrophic drug war, and 1 in 5 American children born into poverty. Almost every major issue we face as a nation can be traced back to this graph. How does this happen? Well, just follow the money. Right now, it's perfectly legal to buy political influence in America. Here's how it works. Let's say a big bank wants a law that would force taxpayers to bail them out again if they repeat the exact same reckless behavior that crashed the global economy in 2008. Not exactly the most popular idea with the public, and Congress knows that. That should be the end of it. But that's where the money comes in. It's perfectly legal for our bank to hire a team of lobbyists whose entire job is to make sure that the government gives the bank what it wants. Then those lobbyists can track down members of Congress who regulate banks and help raise a ton of money for their re-election campaigns. It's perfectly legal for those lobbyists to offer those same politicians million-dollar jobs at their lobbying firm. Then, those lobbyists can literally write the language of this new bailout law themselves and hand it off to the politician they just buttered up with campaign money and lucrative job offers. And it's perfectly legal for those politicians to take the lobbyist-written language and sneak it through Congress at the last second. So now you've got a law that greatly benefits the banks, and the whole process can start over. This is how a bill becomes a law. A special interest hires some lobbyists, those lobbyists collect campaign contributions, offer jobs, and then write the laws that Congress then passes to help those same special interests. This happens every day on every single issue with politicians of both parties. In the last 5 years alone, the 200 most politically active companies in the United States spent $5.8 billion influencing your government. Those same companies got $4.4 trillion in taxpayer support. And that's trillion, with a T. And that's just the top 200 companies. Never mind every other special interest, every union, every trade association, and every billionaire. Every single one of them can use their money to buy political influence. You know, there's this idea out there that this only became a problem after the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision in 2010. But the data goes back almost 40 years, and the results are clear. Corruption is legal in America. And as long as it is, anyone who can spend money to buy political influence will. The solution here isn't rocket science. Make corruption illegal. We already know Congress won't do it. I mean, one look at this chart will tell you that. What we need is a plan that lets us go around Congress and do what the American people do best. Fix this mess ourselves. So here's a crazy thing. Almost everyone I know agrees that the government of the United States, the government of the most powerful nation on the face of the earth, is completely broken. And for most of us, it's really obvious why. Lobbyists write our laws, politicians are bought, and corruption is infecting every issue that's close to our hearts. But what's even crazier is that we've all convinced ourselves that there's nothing we can do about it. And that is one of the biggest and most dangerous lies in American politics. The problem isn't that corrupt politicians are breaking the law. The problem is that we don't even have laws for them to break. Right now, corruption is legal in America. And that is something we can fix. Here's exactly how we do it. Right now, it's perfectly legal for special interests to hand huge checks to the members of Congress who regulate them. It's perfectly legal for those same members of Congress to pass laws to help out lobbyists who offer them a cushy job when they leave office. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. From million-dollar bundlers to the threat of a super PAC smear campaign, there are literally dozens of perfectly legal ways to buy a public official. But that makes the solution pretty obvious. Make corruption illegal. All of it. And that is where the American Anti-Corruption Act comes in. It introduces a strict set of ethical standards, so if you're an elected official on, say, the Senate Banking Committee, you can't take donations from banking lobbyists. It mandates full transparency, so the American people know exactly who's trying to buy our elected officials. It changes how elections are funded, so clean candidates can win without selling out to special interests. And it does all of this while protecting the people's right to free speech. That's because the act was written by top constitutional scholars, conservative and liberal alike, to stand up to the toughest scrutiny. You can read the full text of the act at anticorruptionact.org. And speaking of the Constitution, let's talk about a little Supreme Court ruling called Citizens United. Here's the thing. While a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United would help clamp down on those shady groups with names like Americans for Freedom and Jobs and More Freedom, it wouldn't fix any of the problems we talked about before. You could pass that amendment tomorrow and the bribery, the extortion, the conflicts of interest, all of it would still be legal. But in a weird way, that's actually good news, because it means we can solve a huge part of this problem with a plain old law. The question is, how do we get it passed? I mean, asking Congress to do it is like asking a fox to put a lock on the henhouse. The greasy, dirty, disgusting fox. And also, the fox is a congressman and not a fox at all. Look, my point is, we can go around Congress using a little something called the ballot initiative process. It lets citizens pass laws ourselves, no politicians required. All we have to do is gather enough signatures, put anti-corruption acts up to a simple public vote, and we can start fixing the corrupt system right at home. Here's our plan, in 5 steps. First, we'll need a law to pass. One that, actually fixes things. Okay, Anti-Corruption Act. Check. Next, we need to bring conservatives and progressives together and get organized. It's the only way to build enough power to defeat the politically entrenched and well-funded opposition. We're in good shape there, though, because everyone already agrees we need to fix our corrupt system. In fact, local Tea Partiers and progressive activists actually teamed up to pass America's first Anti-Corruption Act in 2014. And the movement has racked up even more victories since. There are more than 22,000 cities in America where we can use the ballot initiative process to pass locally tailored anti-corruption acts. And this really matters. We're protecting our communities from corruption, so our schools, hospitals, local resources, and jobs are no longer under the constant threat of getting sold out to special interests. Plus, citywide initiatives and resolutions build momentum for the most powerful way we can go around Congress: passing anti-corruption acts in states. State acts not only clean up statewide corruption, they change how elections are funded so clean candidates can win office without selling out to special interests. That goes for federal candidates from that state, too. Once we pass these state laws, we can send a new wave of representatives and senators to Washington. State by state, we can fill Congress with leaders who got elected under the rules of our new anti-corruption acts, replacing entrenched politicians with new blood. See how this works? By taking the fight to the states, we can fix Congress from the outside. And when these new representatives get to Congress, free from dependence on special interests, they'll be free to vote for and pass the American Anti-Corruption Act at the federal level to fix this problem for good. So that's the plan, and 500,000 Represent Us members couldn't agree more. We're bringing conservatives and progressives together to pass anti-corruption acts across America and put power back in the hands of the people, where it belongs. We need millions more people to join, and that includes you. Start by clicking here and we'll tell you exactly how you can help.
In case you find these videos useful, please share them with others so we can help them too. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more videos and updates. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Peace.